What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. In just about any video game, you always have to come up with creative ways of making sure that players can't stray too far into the areas that you don't want them exploring. Whether it's entirely out of bounds, or just a spot that you want to save for later in the game, you can always expect to find some form of roadblock, and Pokémon has had mixed success with this idea over time. Obviously in Gen 1 we had Snorlax introduce us to the idea. Firstly, it meant that we had multiple chances of trying to capture this amazing Pokémon, which can be difficult, but beyond that, it made sure that we didn't get too far into the region until we got stronger and found the Pokéflute to wake it up. And this was a brilliant way to tie the actual game restrictions into the in-universe world and make it feel all the more real. And this line of thinking continued into Johto with the Sudowoodo that made sure that we couldn't just walk right over to Ecruteak after the first gym until you obtained the Squirt Bottle after beating Whitney. And even the random Crustal block that requires Colress to give you a weird machine. However, things have not always been so interesting, and sometimes instead of a beautifully crafted obstruction that blends into the environment, you just get a random guard who's thirsty and won't let you pass. Or my personal favorite, a random line of people who are dancing for no good reason. When we started with such creativity, it's quite apparent that this is a step down as far as integration into this world, and frankly, it breaks the immersion quite a bit. However, even when there are Pokémon in your way sometimes, there's nothing that you actually do to make them move, and they just disappear on their own, like the Wailmer trapping you in Lily Cove. So I think it would be more cohesive and fulfilling if we could actually see the Pokémon themselves be the roadblocks throughout every region more consistently in the Pokémon world, but also be able to directly influence their departure instead of randomly checking off a predetermined task, so that we can have some satisfaction in doing it ourselves. So the first one that we can fix is the thirsty guard that we mentioned before. I get that they were limited in Gen 1, but they also fully displayed that they are capable of creativity with Snorlax, so they clearly could do better, especially since it doesn't even make sense that you only have to give a drink to one guard and then the rest are suddenly fine as well. Also, nothing really directs you to visit a random vending machine anyway, meaning that it's quite annoying to do. So instead, as a fix, I got inspiration from Johto when you're directed to Mr. Pokemon's house. To ensure that you can't accidentally go to Violet City, youngster Joey is actively in the middle of a battle, and you can't pass them until you take the Togepi egg over to Professor Elm. So I think this would be a perfect way to block your path in the gateways of Kanto. An enclosed area would be a great way to practice for the gym matches. So long as they didn't leave a bunch of scorch marks or acid everywhere, I could see them being allowed to fight in a public area with a security guard present. Although in Gen 1 they might have had a hard time conveying that idea since they didn't really have a lot of overworld sprites, but there could be a crowd in your way blocking that visual and someone can just tell you to come back after the riveting fight is done, and then maybe you can return after beating Erica or something. This is a far more believable method of blocking your path, and it makes the world feel bigger to know that other people are into Pokemon battling besides just you. But that's not so much under your control, so how can we make the player more involved in other instances? For example, I actually like the Psyduck as a bottleneck in Sinnoh because you have to take specific actions in order to disperse them, and then it's up to you when to use the secret potion. So I would like more occurrences in that vein, which I think would be able to take us over to Hoenn. There were indeed plenty of HMs around to use as cutoffs, and they did actually have the Kecleon spots that needed you to use the Devon scope, so that was pretty cool, but they also included the much worse example of the Wailmer around Lily Cove. These spherical whales lock you out of exploring further until you go into the evil team base, and then they just disappear. You had nothing to do with it. So how could we fix that? Well, I'm thinking that maybe the Wailmer could react once you collect the red or the blue orb, scared of its power, and they'll run away. However, the only problem is that you can get those before Lily Cove already. It's just not always apparent that you can go south to Mount Pyre when you first come across that area, and many players have to be told to backtrack. Although I guess you could read the road signs, but nah, who does that? Anyway, my solution would be to actively steer the player into Lily Cove first, and only once they've unlocked the evil team lair would they then head to Mount Pyre to steal the appropriate orb. It makes sense to me that they would only stop there after they were sure that they could get down into the ocean in the first place once they stole the submarine. That way, the Whalmer running away from a powerful mystical item makes a lot more sense than just getting bored because you spent too much time in the Team Aqua base. It just makes you feel more connected to the Hoenn region to have the Pokémon react to you in your decisions, and it helps to make it more obvious that you can move south when most players easily pass it by. Now, Kalos is pretty infamous for its roadblocks by just copying the Snorlax from Kanto, and then even more notoriously the Blackout in Lumiose, which is just a copy of Sunny Shore back in Sinnoh. So we gotta do better for Gen 6 here. Now, I realized that they were limited by the hardware a bit, so they couldn't just flood the streets of the city with 1,000 Flabebe that blew in or something crazy like that, but the singular man standing there triggering dialogue every time you try and walk past doesn't work nearly as well as it did back in Gen 4, because 1, there's an entire city street to run past him, and 2, we actively see other people doing it. Not to mention the fact that you can literally see lights on at night, so there's clearly not a blackout. So I may have a proposal that could use the exact same setup without breaking the immersion of the world with such a lapse in logic. If all that they could handle is a single NPC in the middle of the road, then so be it. But whoever said it had to be a human? I think a simple swap of an overworld Esper or Meowstic would do the job just as well, if not better. One of these psychic Pokemon could be standing in the way with their ears open and their eyes glowing, while they use their psychic powers to make sure that nobody gets past this spot. Why are they guarding this particular spot? Who knows? That's what makes it a mystery. Every time you try and sneak past them, they'll just use telekinesis to make you turn around, forcing you to move on from that spot. And then once you come back the long way round, you can tell Clement about it in his gym, and then he could say something like, "Oh, I think I've got an invention that could help out with that actually." And then he could reflect the cat's ESP back onto them or something and send them reeling, so that the other portions of the city could finally be opened up. It probably would be an Esper because they already have the model for that in the post-game Looker missions, and honestly they could tie that in and have it be the same Esper as some cool foreshadowing for Emma in some way, which would make it fit into the world even better. And really, this was only after like 2 minutes of thinking about it. It wasn't that hard, so I guess they never bothered to revisit the placeholder talking about the blackout excuse once they made the rest of the game. Now, right near the start of Sword and Shield after Postwick, there's a line of Wooloo in your way blocking the tiny path to Wedgehurst, but functionally it's just to force you over into the grass so that you encounter a wild Pokemon instead of just walking right into town. One could argue that means they should just design the route to flow better instead of making all of the grass optional here, but let's work with what we've got. Which, to be fair, isn't much, but we can do a little bit. There are spots over here where you can grab some items, so what's stopping it from being a Pokeflute or an Awakening, since apparently they're all sleeping in the middle of the road. Now granted, that's not the most original course of action given previous trends, but it is better than them just vanishing for no good reason. And yeah, I get that it's realistic to Great Britain to have this sort of roadblock, but as with Team Yell, something can be true to life, yet fail to be integrated into the game in a satisfying manner. So how can we fix this strange detour by giving the player more control? Well, assuming that you can't just get a snowplow or something, maybe they could get a preview of the first gym challenge where you chase the Wooloo around and they all roll in front of you. That way you could have some practice with it and it doesn't come out of nowhere later on, establishing it as a common practice here in the Galar region. There could even be an NPC that shows you that you can go around, but they would be ever so grateful if you could help them round up their Wooloo, and then after you corral them all into Wedgehurst, they can give you a reward like an early game TM. Or hey, even a TR to introduce you to that new exclusive variation of the item as well. Or maybe it would be simple enough to just have those Wooloo be the catching tutorial, and then once one of their friends is caught, the rest of them just run away. Simply put, there are plenty of options to make this fit more naturally into the world, instead of standing out as a clear limitation and reminder of the video game that you are currently playing. Although I suppose using actual Pokemon is still better than the super nerd who's obsessed with Pokemon footprints, but honestly that is kinda believable because people hone in on some of the weirdest stuff. However, personally, I think Tangrowth would make a perfect obstacle to use at some point in the future. For a more in-depth discussion on Pokemon Roadblocks, you can check out Droomish. That guy has some pretty great videos. But what do you think of the wild Pokemon Roadblocks they've made over the years? Which one took you out of the experience the most? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded!